Welcome back to the Den. Porter here. Today we will be talking about some positional battles that you want to keep your eyes on this summer as we start to get into the thick of training camp. Welcome to the channel. Hope you stick around. Please, if you love the conversation that we have today, consider liking the video, subscribing. Helps out the channel a lot. And I really want to welcome our first ever recurring guest, Patrick, who joined us for our quarterback rankings. And we're going to start off talking about some quarterbacks today.
And most importantly, we're going to talk about my favorite player, Anthony Richardson, man. What a way to jump back in.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about this quarterback battle. Of course, we have Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones for the Colts. What do you think is going to happen in this situation? And who are you buying in Dynasty at their respective prices?
So I think ultimately both of them will end up starting games this year. I don't think Daniel Jones – it wouldn't surprise me if Daniel Jones started the first game this year. Anthony Richardson's missed so much time during the offseason program, right? And obviously we know that he's a super raw prospect still. He's still, I think, second youngest or third youngest starting quarterback in the NFL, behind J.J. McCarthy and Cam Ward. So, he's had some growing pains his first couple of years in the league. Obviously, he missed a bunch of time due to injuries first year. But I think with him missing all of this time this offseason, the hot seat that the Colts coaching staff and GM are on, I think they'll probably start Daniel Jones to start the season. I think Daniel Jones probably isn't good enough to hold the job for the whole season. And Daniel Jones also has injury concerns of his own. He's missed time with the torn ACL. He had that neck injury. So I think he ultimately end up seeing both. At their price, I'm unabashedly a Richardson guy, just because I think when he plays, he puts up so many fantasy points between running the ball, rushing touchdowns because he's a physical monster at the goal line. And, he does some of the little things well enough that you could potentially see him starting more than 1 year. But I don't know. Daniel Jones, I think if he had a really, really good year, I think he could maybe get another chance at a starting job somewhere. But I think it would be kind of tough to see. I will say the one thing that I'm watching, though, in this quarterback battle and what you see coming out of training camp and everything is I think somebody who's really undervalued, especially if you're like me and you expect Daniel Jones to start some games, at least, especially to start the season. So I think Josh Downs at wide receiver 38 on Keep Trade Cut. 50% of Daniel Jones's targets last year went to the slot. He was a big reason why Wan'Dale Robinson had 140 targets last year. I think Josh Downs has a little bit more juice than Wan'Dale than turning those 140 targets into like 700 yards or whatever it was.
I think like an all-time low.
It was like running back levels of average depth of target and stuff like that. So if the reports out of training camp sound like Daniel Jones is going to win, I think Josh Downs is primed for a huge, huge year. And then conversely, I think somebody like Alec Pierce, if Daniel Jones is to win the job, I think he would be. I think his value would suffer a hit. He runs those deep concepts, doesn't catch a lot of short passes, doesn't do a lot of catch and run. And Daniel Jones, just frankly, the last few years hasn't really threatened the deep part of the field. So I think he's somebody who could really struggle in fantasy, as opposed to last year when he'd have those spike games with Richardson that could win you weeks in best ball formats.
I think it's important that the people know that the last full season that Daniel Jones played healthy, he was a top 12 quarterback in points per game. So I know of course, narrative around Daniel Jones won't really be positive at this stage, but as a fantasy asset, he certainly has produced. So, like you're saying, if you're expecting him to start even as early on as week 1, he produces when he's on the field.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, he's not a sexy name to start by any means. You know what I mean? But I think at the end of the day, like, he'll score you fantasy points. It won't be a pretty thing. Like, it's not like he's going to go out there and throw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns or anything like that. He'll throw for like, 200. He'll run for 50 more. He might run for a touchdown, or, like he'll get you an ugly 15 to, 15-ish points. But, like when you're asking for that from your QB too, like that's not a bad performance. I just think he doesn't have the fantasy ceiling of somebody like Anthony Richardson, who I think is, a little bit more valuable around the goal line. He's a little bit more physical and useful in the goal line. And the other thing too is, Anthony Richardson. We're talking about Alec Pierce. Last year, Anthony Richardson completed the second highest percentage of passes in the NFL of quarterbacks who passes 20 yards down the field with no pressure. It was like a 76% catchable ball rate. So for somebody like Alec Pierce, and if you're in a best ball format, like I said, it's kind of wheels up if Richardson wins the job, because he'll hit you those like big explosive plays, those 50-yard touchdowns, those 60-yard touchdowns. It's just not going to be a consistent thing.
I'm a bit surprised that you think that Jones will outright win the battle or early on. I know you're saying that you think both will start. I think I'm probably of the opposite belief that bringing in Daniel Jones is more of the established veteran, where it makes it so, if Richardson doesn't start strong, that you kind of have a vet waiting in the wings. But I'm with you where I think that both will also start. I almost just see the reverse narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that with Richardson missing the time in the offseason program and everything, I think it kind of gives Daniel Jones a leg up going into training camp. And, from there, last year at Giants training camp, Daniel Jones looked good. People were all about Daniel Jones having a resurgence, and then we got to the season and it kind of, everything kind of went upside down. I could kind of see something like that happening. And again, the Colts are on such a hot seat. Shane Steichen's got questions about his job. So does the GM, Chris Ballard. I think they're under a lot of pressure to win, and I think they're going to look at it through training camp and say, well, we know Anthony Richardson gives us these highs, but his lows are, way down. Whereas Daniel Jones will give you a constant, like he's more consistent, very, very steady. You know what you're going to get. And sometimes coaches value that.
Yeah. And Anthony Richardson's QB 30 on Keep Trade Cut, whereas Daniel Jones isn't very far behind at QB 32. So I know they're both in a similar range here. At those prices, who you buying?
Again, I think and this comes back to our home league too, where I've held Anthony Richardson through, they'll pry him from my cold dead hands. But I just think he's got the potential to be a fantasy star. And so I would rather buy him than Daniel Jones, who I think will always kind of be more mediocre-ish, for as far as fantasy purposes goes. Like when he's playing, he's more quarterback 12 to 18, whereas I think Richardson, if he were to take a step forward on the field, could be quarterback. He could
be one overall. You could say it.
He could be a top 10 quarterback. He could be a top 5 quarterback. His combination of legs and explosive passing plays and everything. If he puts it together, I mean, he could be great. But it's just, it's like a 5% outcome. But sometimes, it's worth swinging depending on what your team build is and if you can survive that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have two really pretty quarterback names to talk about as well. And I want to go to New Orleans here and talk about the Saints quarterback situation. Chuck, of course, the rookie out of, 3 years at Oregon, 3 years at Texas Tech, and 1 year at Louisville. Drafted pick 40, top of the second round. The first quarterback drafted under this new Kellen Moore regime. And then we also have somewhat of the incumbent. I mean, I know we had Derek Carr, Haener, and Rattler all start last year, but we have Spencer Rattler, who got 6 starts last year in the NFL, 0 wins in those 6 starts. But we're going to have these two duke it out. most likely to see who will be the starter for the New Orleans Saints. And just a couple of things. I think, Patrick, you may be surprised here. I'm starting to become a Tyler Shuck guy, I think.
Is it the experience that he has? You know, they had to get rid of the rookie, the young gun Spencer Rattler, and bring in the experienced vet Tyler Shuck.
Yeah. No, I want to talk about Shuck first. So yeah, as I mentioned, I mean, he's been in college for 7 years, so certainly has experience. Although he did deal with some injuries in college. His final year at Texas Tech, his season was cut pretty short with a broken fibula, which is definitely unfortunate. But then, recovers from that and plays the full season at Louisville. His final season stats in his final year, he played 12 games. He threw for just about 3,200 yards with a 62.7 completion percentage, a 23 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and he only took 14 sacks as well. And looking at the stat sheet, you would think that he's just kind of a statue and he doesn't move a lot. I mean, he only added 42 yards on the ground in college. But if you go back to his Texas Tech tape, specifically the game against Oregon, where he was really tested with a top defense in the country, he can move. So I think with quarterbacks, we're always wanting to look at traits, and the production profile doesn't always match that. But I mean, he's a big guy and he can move more than you would think. And teams really were sold on him with his Senior Bowl and beyond process. They just loved his, dedication and work ethic, and showed up really well for every step of the process there. And whereas with Rattler, I want to compare him as a prospect first. In his final collegiate season, he also played 12 games, just under 3,200 yards, but he had a 68.9 completion percentage, and it's a little more volatile with the touchdowns and interceptions, where he had 19 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. But Rattler didn't necessarily make the best case for himself last season, despite people like me that love Rattler, and watching him, it feels electric. Digging into the stats were pretty ugly. Starting with, this is the big one for me, is that in his 6 games, he took 22 sacks. And the Saints offensive line, I don't want to make excuses for them. They played incredibly poorly last year, and they're definitely a bottom ranked line in the NFL. But of course, that is a huge red flag, something we talked about with our quarterback rankings too. I think both of us certainly get scared by that statistic. So my justification for, I think, them drafting a guy like Tyler Shuck, even though it felt early, is exactly what you said, where it's the experience, right? Being 25 years old, 7 collegiate seasons, not all as a starter, but you're in the rooms and learning. So 7 collegiate seasons, doesn't really turn the ball over. Like I said, the 23-6 touchdown interception ratio, and he doesn't really take sacks either. So I think that that's what they liked, and thinking of Kellen Moore coming in and looking at the quarterbacks that he's dealing with, and probably the red flag on Rattler's tape is the same thing we're talking about, of just like not being able to get rid of the ball and causing negative plays for his team. So I think that's what they see in Shuck, is just a guy who will not turn the ball over, who will not take sacks. And Kellen Moore, as we know, I think he's pretty much known for making the quarterback's life easy. He loves to scheme up just really easy reads. Last year, Jalen Hurts had the highest completion percent of his career with Kellen Moore. So he's just a guy who we know, former quarterback. He's gonna do everything he can to make that part of the offense click. And my argument is really just that I think the cost is really what comes into play here. Both Shuck and Rattler. Yeah, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, because Shuck's quarterback 31 on Keep Take Cut, and Rattler's 39. I was surprised to see him that close, when I feel like, personally, I'm expecting Tyler Shuck to win this job pretty handily, given what they invested in him.
And everything that Kellen Moore has said seems to be leaning towards that. Like, they're kind of just saying Shuck's going to get these opportunities. So I think whoever wins this battle is just going to be underrated in general, because it's the Saints and this isn't a great situation, but you still do have Chris Olave. You still do have Kamara to dump the ball off to. And if Kellen Moore is, just a good enough offensive coach, he can make it work in the NFL. And that's what I want to see. And then I do know that the downside would kind of be, is this just going to be the worst team in the NFL? and they get Arch Manning or insert quarterback here in next year's class, and it doesn't really matter who wins this battle. But as we know in our home league, like we have in a super flex, you have contenders that probably only really have two quarterbacks. There just aren't enough to go around.
The guy who won the championship 2 years ago was starting Gardner Minshew in a super flex spot.
Yeah. So if you're holding a starting quarterback asset, it's just more valuable than you think. And I know it's at like 31 for Shuck. I think that's still just too low.
I think it's too low for a quarterback who's likely to start in his rookie season, and the organization has obviously invested in him. I mean, granted, it's a second round pick. It's not like they took him, at 9 or something like that. But still, like, it shows that they think highly of him. And if they're, the Saints are always in a place where they're trying to contend every single season, they might price themselves out of 2026 quarterbacks if he plays well enough, and again, all you can do is just, if you have the opportunity, you have to see if they can run with it. You never know. What were people saying about Dak 10 years ago? When he was going to start for the Cowboys, everybody was probably saying, oh, he's only going to start for this year. The Cowboys are going to replace him next year, or yada, yada, yada. And then boom, a full season later and, 10 years later, and he's one of the highest paid players in NFL history.
Yeah, I think the comparison that comes to mind, and this might just because this is the most recent person I can think of that was like an early second round quarterback, which was Will Levis. So we saw how that played out because he was picked 33 to the Titans 2 years ago. And he flashed in that first game. And of course, now, you can't do anything with him in Dynasty. There's really no hope. So this is definitely a quarterback dead zone in terms of NFL draft capital. But if I'm going to buy in, I think Shuck actually has that profile. And this is what we saw last year. These quarterbacks who have a lot of college experience that are not messing up in games get these opportunities. So again, we're talking about quarterback 31 priced here. So don't want people to think I'm telling you to sell all your first for Tyler Shuck. But I think where you're getting him in rookie drafts is a steal.
Are there any Saints skill players that you would want to target? Shuck versus Rattler?
Are you, in terms of like depending on who starts?
Yeah, I mean you've got Olave and you've got Kamara there, who are kind of the main options no matter what. But I was just curious if you had somebody else who you were keeping an eye on.
Honestly, no. I think they both profile pretty similarly with kind of their yards per attempt. At least with Shuck in college. So I don't think the players are impacted. I will say Olave to me is a big buy, and that's fully independent of who starts. He's really falling because people don't view either of these quarterbacks very highly. And he's really dropped with where you can go get him in a startup. So that's certainly a target. But yeah, I think it is independent. I would say I could see Kamara having more of a bump with Shuck specifically. Although I'm doing some projecting on my part, where Rattler with the sacks kind of does have that hero ball mentality. And those types of quarterbacks, I don't think we see checking down to the running back very much. Whereas Shuck is probably more of the gonna play in the system and just do what the coach tells him to.
Yeah.
Which might limit some upside, but really good for Kamara, I would think.
Yeah. Real quick though, here's my favorite fun fact about Tyler Shuck. Who did he back up his first 2 years at Oregon?
It's got to be Bo Nix. No?
No. It's just
he wouldn't have been there. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
What are we talking? That's 2018. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that puts things into perspective.
It does.
All right. So my buy, I think, is Shuck. But in all reality, these are two guys where I think I'd want both of them. They're both low enough cost that if I only have two quarterbacks and I can draft Shuck in the late second and like trade away a third or fourth, depending on your league, to go get Rattler and just lock down the position, I'd feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the team in our league that has both of them, we can't get trades done with. So I don't know if I can pull it off in our league, but hopefully other people have better luck there. I want to move on to some receivers here.
Yeah. So, one of the big receiver battles we're watching, Christian Kirk versus Jalen Noel, Houston Texans. Christian Kirk came over for a sixth-round draft pick from the Jaguars, and then Jalen Noel, the Texans took him in the third. Still top 100 pick, big producer at Iowa State. Both of them mostly slot-only players. They don't really have the size to truly consistently play on the outside. So it's going to kind of be an interesting battle to see who takes more of the snaps in that rotation. Something I am keeping an eye on, though, last year, Nico Collins took about 20% of his snaps in the slot. With the Texans taking Jaden Higgins in the second round, first pick of the second round, do we think that they maybe play Nico Collins more in the slot this year? It'll be something that's worth tracking as reports from training camp and everything come out. The one thing I will say, I think it's pretty clear that Noel is probably the guy to own in this league. Just in this battle, the Texans have spent more draft capital getting him. Christian Kirk's, I think, on the last year of his deal. Texans are kind of in a win now mode, so I don't know that they necessarily wanted the growing pains of Noel to step on the field right away as a starter in the slot. But I think the thing that you've got to consider is, like, Noel really didn't have a huge breakout. He's a late breakout kind of guy, which doesn't always translate to the NFL super well. He really broke out in his third year at Iowa State. And Christian Kirk, he's kind of been there. He's been that steady producer. Kirk's big issue is he's always dropping passes in Jacksonville, along with the rest of the Jacksonville receivers. As a Trevor Lawrence fan or a Trevor Lawrence owner, I'll never forgive him for some of them. But I think Noel is the guy I would buy. I think he'll take over this job by the Texans bye, which I think is week 6. I forgot to write that down. I don't know if you've got that in front of you.
No, but for reference here, Noel is wide receiver 56 on Keep Trade Cut, and Kirk is wide receiver 74. So there is a pretty big discrepancy, and the market definitely certainly favors Jalen Noel.
Yeah, and I mean, I just really am interested to see if the Texans, they got Higgins, who kind of profiles as that big X receiver, which is where Nico Collins normally plays, and I'm interested to see if Nico Collins kind of sneaks and steals even some of the snap share from Kirk and Noel. I mean, I'm not too worried about either. I mean, obviously Tank Dell is going to miss this whole season. I think they've already announced that he's missing the season, and then. The kid from Alabama who's been there a couple of years. They took him in the second. Yeah, John Mechie. I don't think John Mechie, he really struggled down the stretch last year when they gave him a lot of playing time after the Tank Dell injury. I think these two are the ones who are going to get the lion's share of the snaps. And I think if you can own both, I would pretty confidently start Christian Kirk the first couple of weeks of the season. But I think come midseason, I think that's going to be Jalen Noel's job.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we saw last year, even before the season started, all 3 Texans receivers were drafted probably in the first 5 rounds of most fantasy drafts, right? Everyone was really expecting Stroud to be able to support Collins, Diggs, and Dell, and he really did. It wasn't really, looking at their stats from last season, different guys exploded different weeks, which of course is really what tends to happen in those types of rooms. But there are a lot of targets to go around. So I think Noel can certainly be productive if he gets like that Tank Dell vertical slot role. And my Jalen Noel comp was Christian Kirk. So I think they're a similar player, but he's younger. I think he has a bit more play strength. So I expect him to take over that role as well. So tell me, I know, he's not really part of this battle here. So are you assuming that Jaden Higgins is kind of the clear number 2 from the get-go?
I think so. I mean, they took him 33rd overall. They gave him a fully guaranteed contract, the first one to a second-round pick. in NFL history. Though the Browns signed the linebacker at pick 34 to a fully guaranteed as well. But I think like he's somebody who got a lot of late helium in the draft process. The NFL seemed very, very high on him. And I think, he's a big physical body who can, win at the catch point. He'll be a threat in the red zone. And, he, in theory, you might be able to move Nico Collins into the slot if you like those matchups with Nico Collins on safeties or linebackers from time to time. It gives you a little bit more positional flexibility, and I think he'll dominate a snap share over. I think he'll play more snaps than Noel or Christian Kirk this coming season.
I think this might be a hot take, but I think Noel is the second guy I want on that offense.
I can see that. I just
I think that role that we saw Tank Dell thrive in. I just think there's so much there for him to take, and I do like Jaden Higgins certainly as a player. I just think he'll have more of that like sacrificial X type route tree.
Yeah, the run, like getting those wind sprints in.
The Marvin Harrison role. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but I think if you're in a league where Christian Kirk seems to have some staying power with the name value, so if he does have a couple of good weeks early on, I would be trying to sell.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's kind of one of those things, right? Like it's like Devin Singletary last year in the Giants backfield, which I think we're talking about later. Where people assume the name value, they see him in that slot, they see him have a good couple first weeks, and all of a sudden, you can flip him for something useful down the line. I mean, I don't think you'll ever really flip Christian Kirk for anything, maybe more than a third or a lottery pick or, something along those lines. But I mean, there's always somebody who's willing to buy, and it's always worth seeing what the market says he's worth.
Part of this is knowing the owners and being a good marketer,
right?
More than anything.
For sure.
I have some receivers to talk about. It's a little less of a battle, I would say, because I think it's so ambiguous as to what this is going to look like. But I really do want to talk about the Patriots wide receiver room, particularly Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams. However, this is just going to be kind of like a hodgepodge of guys again, and I'm not entirely sure what it's going to look like. But some stats that I found to be quite interesting with this group. So Patrick, if you had a guess, who do you think led the team in targets last year for New England?
It's got to be Kayshon Boutte.
Well, I may have not even wide receivers, just total on the team. I don't know if that changes your answer.
Oh, Antonio Gibson?
It is Hunter Henry with 97 targets for Hunter Henry last season. Second was Pop Douglas, Demario Douglas, 87 targets. And then Kayshon Boutte did have 68. And then fourth was Austin Hooper with 59. So we got two tight ends there in the top four. Boutte with 68, and then Pop, playing in the slot with 87. And I think what just really was interesting with this grouping that they now have, of course, they add Stephon Diggs in free agency. Stephon Diggs played 64% of his snaps in the slot. It was a limited sample size with Houston because, of course, he tore the ACL. But in the games he did play last season for Houston, he was used 64% in the slot. Pop Douglas used in the slot 70% of plays. And then Kyle Williams, their new addition, also a third-round pick like Jalen Noel. I think Noel and Williams, two guys of that third round that I absolutely love, way heads and shoulders above the rest of that group that was drafted there. But so Williams really should come in here and be the field stretcher, we would assume, because I think at this stage of his career, Diggs will be more effective in the slot. And we're seeing a lot of targets here on the table. I don't know if Hunter Henry will get 97 targets again, depending what happens here. But Hunter Henry, another I know it's a tight end conversation, but I think he's a good buy as well. But also I want to talk about our guy Drake May, because Drake May in high school. So there's a really good YouTube video that the Patriots put out around pretty much right when they drafted May. It's like a mini documentary of his journey to the NFL. And in that, there's an interview with his high school coach at Myers Park in North Carolina. And he said one of the really unique things about Drake May was that as you know, like so many kids are in whatever sport, like at halftime, they're trying to check the stat book. Like, I don't know, basketball, I feel like you do that a lot. Like, how many points did I get? Drake May was always working with the stat group, looking at the scorebook, but the coach said it was never to look at his own stats. He was looking at who he was targeting and who wasn't catching the ball, who wasn't being fed, which just beautiful character story. But so I think Drake May does have this reputation of really spreading the ball around. And when we look at what happened last season, you see that's the case. And if we look at Drake May's final collegiate season, the leading receiver only had 46 catches, and then there were three other guys who were above 40. So he kind of has kept these guys in his same range. But then the big counter argument here is looking at Drake May's sophomore season, where he had Josh Downs, who came up earlier. And in that season, Josh Downs had 94 receptions with Drake May. And then the second, third, and fourth on the team had 43, 35, and 29 receptions, respectively. So my point here is that when Drake May has a go-to guy he can trust, that role will definitely exist. And I think if Drake May does not have that guy at any point in his career, he's proven that since his high school days, he's the type of quarterback that will spread it out evenly.
Just to add on something, I know you said that his leading receiver only had 47 targets. His senior
catches.
Yeah.
That
was the kid who he's with the Ravens now. The Ravens took him in the 4th round in the 2023 draft. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name right now.
I think the player you're thinking, I can't think of his name either, but he actually missed time that season. So it's not
he missed
him.
the first 6 games of that season before he finally got eligible, and he was getting targeted 16 times a game. So Drake May's definitely willing to force feed guys the ball if he thinks that they are the best option that he has. And
last year he did that. It happened to be Hunter Henry.
Well, yeah. I mean, last year was a tough year for the Patriots in the terms of weapons. But like you said, I believe in Drake May. I'm first aboard the Drake May fan club. So I think both of these guys are buys at cost. Kyle Williams, wide receiver 50 on keep trade cut. Stephon Diggs, 58 as of the time of this recording. I think Diggs is somebody who's fallen a little bit because people remember how good he used to be, and he's not what he once was. But I think last year showed he's a guy who can still play at a high level.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's what's so interesting is just they're filling this roster with a lot of slot guys. So to me, if I kind of picture how I think this offense looks, I think Diggs is the slot. So I think Pop Douglas kind of becomes irrelevant. I mean, he wasn't super fantasy relevant to begin with, but he had games there. So, and I liked him. I thought he was an exciting player at times, but I think that's the role that Diggs gets. And I think you start Kyle Williams on the outside. I think that's what they drafted him to be. And then I actually think Kayshon Boutte showed enough last year, really being the most reliable outside wide receiver. And I don't know if there's enough competition brought in where he would lose that time. But he's probably the third man on the field because you can still play Diggs on the outside. So I would assume it's William and Diggs as the top two guys there, with Hunter Henry in the mix as well. But I do think Boutte will have a role in the rotation.
What about Jalen Polk? Do you have any have any feel for if he's going to be a contributor this year, make a big step?
I don't see it. I know he actually just had a surgery, so he's certainly rehabbing that as well, and is certainly personally priming a comeback. I guess we just have to hope that whatever was going on with Polk last season was just true beef between him and that coaching staff, and that he gets a fresh start, which I think he will. I just don't know if we saw enough on the field. I mean, he was incredibly inefficient, had drops, not separating, pretty much every metric you look at him granted it's a limited sample size. He didn't give you a lot to be hopeful with, which is unfortunate because I did like him a lot as a prospect.
Yeah, it was so funny because as a prospect, he was known for having great hands, being really physical through the catch point. And then he gets to New England, and suddenly, it's like all of that just kind of went up in smoke.
Yeah, I think Penix just really made some guys some pretty big paychecks, I think.
Yeah, you know,
But you said so. Wait, you said that Diggs is 56 and Williams is
uh,
58,
Diggs
or no?
is
Flip
Diggs is 58, and Williams is 50.
50. I think I really do love Kyle Williams, but I think even at that price, I still think Diggs is the buy to me in that scenario. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel like I'm cheating with all my answers for these things. I want both, but Diggs at 58. I mean, if I can send late second for Diggs, absolutely, I'm doing that. Which might not be a realistic trade, depending who's holding him in your league.
yeah,
But if people are looking at him like, at that 58 price tag, and you can acquire him, I think just as a contender, I'd much rather have Diggs than Kyle Williams.
yeah. I think Diggs has a little bit more of a floor, right? Like, at a certain point, he's going to get his catches, he's going to get his big plays. Um, so Williams is kind of more in theory, like he could go out and not really do much of anything, and you could be left holding like a really volatile asset. I think Diggs. I mean, I don't think there are 58 wide receivers in fantasy football that I would expect to outperform Stephon Diggs over the next 2 years.
Yeah, if he's Drake
But
May's number one target, you're gonna flex him every single week.
yeah, he's going to be worth flexing every single week, in my mind, at least.
Mm. And that third round receiver hit rate is not super strong. So I think as exciting of a prospect Kyle Williams is, there is just I'm not saying you can't believe in him. I really do, and I believe he's going to break the trend and what the hit rates would say. But always just take it with a grain of salt and just know that there is a possibility that he might not get a ton of opportunities, or even if he does have a pretty solid season and Diggs leaves or retires or something, they're going to draft another receiver really high next year. So there's so many possibilities.
Yeah,
But for the time being, I think Kyle Williams is a pretty good investment as well.
yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Speaking of some investments, I think we might even have a four-way committee here in Jacksonville at the running back position. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on these guys, Patrick.
Liam Cohen has his work cut out for him this year. That's what I'm taking away from this. Um, yeah, so like you said, four person competition. You've got LaQuint Allen, rookie out of Syracuse, taken in the 7th round. You've got Bashaw Tutin taken out of Virginia Tech, go Hokies, in the 4th round. You've got Tanks Bigsby, 3rd year. And then you've got Travis Etienne, who is on his 5th-year option for out of Clemson from five years ago. The one thing I really want to stress is last year, total lost season for Etienne. He wasn't as bad as we made it out to be before he strained his hamstring in week 6 against the Bears over in London. He was a running back to the first 4 weeks of the season before the wheels really fell off once he strained his hamstring and it just went way downhill. I think the interesting thing to really follow here is what's the usage going to be like. Tanks Bigsby has really bad fumbling problems. He had 3 last year on 168 carries. He's not a great pass catcher. He's not a great pass blocker. Both of those rank very low on PFF. So he doesn't really give you much on passing downs. He's got the ball security issues. I don't know how much Liam Cohen's going to really trust him. But on the other hand, last year he led the league in the percentage of his yards that came after contact. So when those limited opportunities for the Jags running backs came up, he really took advantage of them, forcing missed tackles, getting a couple extra yards here and there, and then he was pretty solid down by the end zone. Last year, I just said that. The other thing to consider, Etienne also not a great pass blocker, but he's been a great receiver his entire career. I remember when he first got drafted in 2020, there was talk that they were going to play him at kind of almost a gadget role, running back and wide receiver.
He was Jameer
Yeah,
Gibbs before Jameer Gibbs, like as
yep,
a how he was talked about in the offseason.
yeah. I mean, and then last year he had 52 targets. He had 73 the year before. Both him and both ETN and Bigsby were in the top 5 in the whole league in the percentage of their yards that came after contact too. So I think that really just kind of stresses. I think everybody's really down on ETN. I think I think last year was just a total wash. Especially in a PPR league, I think he's got a solid floor for people. Um, Tootin, I think, is the third main competitor in this backfield. Um, but he's also flawed in a couple ways. He's got last year he had 9 fumbles in his 2 years of Virginia Tech. I couldn't find his stats at North Carolina A&T, but I assume it wasn't as big of an issue there. But 9 fumbles in 2 years is sort of a lot. He's also not a great pass catcher. Last year he had 27, I think it was 27 targets he had 23 catches for 81 yards last year, which obviously, not the greatest. The Virginia Tech passing game was really limited. Their quarterback did not have a great year last year, but it's just one of those things. If he was really a true difference maker as a pass catcher, I think they would have worked to get the ball into his hands a little bit more in that fashion.
Did you at
Um,
least see, and you're of course a Virginia Tech fan. So in watching the games, do you feel like he has that ability at least that like with NFL coaching it could be brought out more? Or you really just think that he didn't show enough even when he did get the ball, that that's not a piece of his upside that you see?
he was a pretty solid pass catcher the year before. He had around, I think, 200 yards receiving on like 20-ish catches. It was a lot more efficient the year before, but he catches the ball with his hands. He's just a little bit of a smaller guy, and I don't know. It just was never really a focus part of his game at Virginia Tech. But when the ball's in his hands, he's a really explosive runner. Last year against Boston College, he ran for like almost 300 yards in the one game. Broke off multiple long runs. If he can hold on to the ball and not fumble, I think he's got a shot to get some serious work in this backfield. But um, I think the main buy right now, you know, it's tough to say because all of them are kind of, it's a new regime. The regime picked Tootin, they picked LaQuint Allen. Um, I think ETN's almost the buy in this backfield.
Yeah, I mean, you have a player of his caliber that, gets slandered this much and falls as much as he does. You still gotta kind of have some hope there that they can turn it around.
Yeah, I think Tootin's the hot name right now. Because everybody's, always excited about rookies. And he's got that explosive pedigree from Virginia Tech. I just think that this is going to be a situation where the Jags might just, try and run Travis Etienne until the tread falls off the tires.
Yeah.
Um,
Like you said, Bigsby was pretty solid last year too. Even just referencing your kind of yards after contact stat, like I think he can play as well. So I think a lot of people are viewing the Tootin battle as really him versus ETN when there are other guys in this mix.
Yeah, I think the real thing that's really going to hold back both of them is they've got to hold on to the football. Not Travis. Bashal Tootin had the fumble in minicamp on like the first day too, and it
His
was
first carry, I think.
his first
Yeah.
carry. Everybody was
Yeah.
all worked up about it. Um, the reality of it is you can't be sending guys out there who are putting the ball on the ground, and so that is one of the things that Travis Etienne is fairly good about not fumbling the ball. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you could convince me that any of the three really dominate the backfield. I'm not super high on LaQuint Allen in this competition. He could maybe get some work as a designated passing down guy. He was a good pass protector in college, and he did catch a decent number of passes at Syracuse. But I think the main lion's share of the work is going to be between ETN, Bigsby, and Tootin. And it could be one of those things where every single week it's, somebody different, which will frustrate fantasy owners to no end. But
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah,
kind of
and I will
see.
say what. You go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no. I mean, I personally, like, gun to my head, I would probably take ETN, but you could convince me for either of Bigsby or Tootin just as easily.
Yeah. I do want to leave one final thought on LeQuint Allen. Of course, I'm an Orangeman myself, so there's some bias here, but he's free. So I do
Yeah,
think he is a very good pass protector, like one of the top in this class, like kind of the way people talk about Trevion Henderson. I think like LeQuint Allen is that level of pass protector, and he's a very good pass catcher too. So it's weird. I mean, he's a 7th round pick, so it's not a lot, but he could carve out a 3rd down role somehow. It's possible, and you're paying nothing for him. So don't hate the like taxi squad stash in that case.
yeah, and I mean it's all about having a path to playing time, right? Especially when you're taking guys who are free. Um, it's if there's a guy who's got a role and he can get onto the field, there's nothing that says that he can't expand that slowly.
Mhm. So
You
I know
know,
you picked ETN. I'm just gonna say, let's say ETN gets traded or leaves after this season. Who do you think leads the backfield in 2026?
um, so they gave up their first next year. Did they give up their second too?
I think they did.
I'd probably I'd probably lean Tootin, but again, it's really going to come down to who holds onto the football.
Mhm.
I think they're a prime team who could be considering a running back in the second round next year. If they do have their second, I think that would be a big target for them. Though I sort of referenced around it. I think offensive line is something that they're really going to need to step up and really fix long term. I think Walker Little at left tackle and Anton Harrison at right tackle are both pretty. They're average-ish to above average. But I think their interior, it's a little bit on the older side for as far as NFL terms go, and I think that's somewhere that they could be looking to upgrade on over the next couple of years with draft picks.
Mhm. Yeah, I see that. All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap up here with another running back battle that I think is kind of a similar situation, and that's the New York Giants, where we of course have an early day 3 pick coming in Cam Scatabo. We have Tyrone Tracy, late round pick last year that did flash, former wide receiver converted to running back. And the invisible third man in this mix is Devin Singletary, who they paid quite a bit of money to bring in as their starter last season, and he certainly got work early on, and then ultimately was pretty much replaced and on an every down basis with Tyrone Tracy. And so now we certainly have a 3-headed monster in the, or I mean, monster is not the right word, but a 3-headed committee there in New York. I'll start with the exciting rookie in Cam, who in his final season last year at Arizona State, I mean, I think anyone who watched ASU play, like he was the absolute, like just like cog in that machine that made that entire offense work. And he put up over 1,700 yards on the ground, as well as about 600 receiving yards. And the only player who had over 1,500 yards and over 1,500 yards on the ground and over 500 yards receiving previously before Cam was Christian McCaffrey. So he puts himself in some pretty elite collegiate production as a running back, like definitely like legendary status there. And he gets, just like Tootin, one of the very first picks of round 4. So gets very early day 3 draft capital. And he goes into a situation here where they certainly need to figure out what's going on in the backfield. So last year, Tyrone Tracy, he had 839 yards on the ground. But I think, of course, as we know, with that receiver background where he really flashed was as a receiver. So that's certainly the skill set that he showed. A big kind of red flag in his game as well was fumbles. So very similar to what you were just talking about with the Jaguars, where he logged 5 fumbles last season. And then we also had Devin Singletary contribute early on. He got most of his work, but he had 437 yards on the ground. He also had 2 fumbles, which is pretty much why he lost his starting role, because those were pretty critical early on in the season. And then they bring in Tyrone Tracy, who also seemingly had a fumble issue. And Cam Scotabo, I actually struggled to find the data on this. There were some conflicting data points, but it seems that in his career at ASU, at least, Cam only had 1 fumble. So he doesn't have that problem. And I think what's interesting is I'm not entirely sure how this backfield will work, because Tyrone Tracy, typically would profile as being like a really good third down back here. But Cam has that skill set as a receiver. So I kind of just think that Cam here has a very clear path to being a 3-down workhorse, despite being in this committee environment. And the other skill set that I think Cam really brings to the Giants is red zone, specifically red zone production, because both Tracy and Singletary were pretty terrible. Looking at their situational splits in the red zone last year, Devin Singletary was only averaging 2.8 yards per carry within the 20. And for Tyrone Tracy, it was 2.4 yards per carry. So both of them were not in the range you want to be, even despite obviously you're getting some short yardage work. But neither of them could really make it work there. And I think that's one of the positives about Cam is just his physical nature. He's not going to come down on that first contact, and he'll really push for some extra yards. So
Yeah.
I think all the weaknesses that this pairing last year brought, Cam can pretty much fix all of them. And I originally had Tootin ahead of him on my rankings. And as I was doing my rankings video, talking through these situations, I'm like, wait, Cam to me should be higher.
Yeah. I mean, Cam's like modern day Boobie Miles, man. There's nothing he can't do on the field. He catches, he runs, and he can pass. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. It's like we said with the Jaguars. I think Tracy, if you're going to keep putting the ball on the ground, it's going to be tough for you to stay on the field. The coaches just aren't going to trust you, and they're not going to give you the ball. Yeah, I mean, and Cam, great tackle breaker. Are you concerned at all about the low athleticism scores as he gets into the NFL?
Typically, I think I would be, but it actually seems that in a weird way, like you would think it would matter more. Athleticism may not be the end all be all for running backs. Like I think we were just all as a community kind of proven wrong on that last year, particularly with like Bucky Irving, who didn't have a very good athletic profile. But then when you see like the contact balance and the vision, that can really make up for some of the athletic traits. And I think with athletics, you're almost looking like, are they good enough of an athlete? Like that's sort of like the bar that you need to hit. And I think Cam does have that. I mean, he showed explosiveness, certainly with like his broad jump. I believe he was like number 1 in the class for that at running back. So he has the explosiveness, and I think he's just what this team needs. And you can picture it now, the storyline of him just being this like absolute like hero in New York, where everyone has his jerseys.
He's going to sell 8 million jerseys in New York City, man. Like
pair him with Tommy Cutlets, man, and you'll make billions of dollars.
There are Giants fans that will hunt you down for saying that, man.
But I really do. I think Cam's everything they need.
Yeah, no,
perfectly.
I'm very high on Cam. I like Cam a lot. I think he's like you said, he's a well-rounded player. He catches a lot of passes, which is great in PPR leagues. So it gives you a nice little floor. And I think the Giants offense steps forward this year with Russ and Jackson Dart eventually probably taking over at some point this season. So it'll give them some more red zone opportunities for Scatterbo to cash in and put some more rushing touchdowns on the board for him.
Yeah. I think he's one of my biggest risers at this point in the offseason, just because I was viewing him a lot like Tootin because of the similar draft capital and what feels like a similar situation. But I'm starting to just see that I think his path to volume is really like underrated. I don't think Singletary, despite the contract, I think they're kind of out on him. And Daboll had a pretty personal relationship with Singletary as well from their Buffalo days.
Yeah,
And
I
so the
mean, the
fact
Hard
that they
Knocks
kind of
show.
just, yeah, they cast him aside pretty much immediately for Tracy. And they're probably, I still believe in Daboll as a coach, but he is coaching for his job.
Yeah, no, they're not going to they're not going to give people the benefit of the doubt this year just based off of personal relationships. They're going to be pedal to the metal from day one. They're going to want to win right away. They're not going to want to take time to really develop people and give opportunities for missteps. I think, especially when you look at their schedule to start the season, it's pretty brutal. They're going to want to hit the ground running.
And that is probably one of the things certainly to consider in like redraft. Um, I wouldn't expect as much out of Cam. Like, I think we're really talking him up right now, which he deserves. But really, from like the dynasty perspective, I think he has a workhorse role waiting for him in the NFL.
Yeah, I could definitely see it. I think he's got a golden path towards achieving that. I think it's really just going to he if he plays like he did at Arizona State, he'll have that job completely taken over by week 1 or week 2.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you coming
Man.
prepared with some fun battles to talk about.
Yeah, man,
And I
this was
hope,
fun.
yeah, it was great. If there's something we missed or there's a battle that you're really keeping your eyes on this offseason, definitely leave us a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. And maybe we'll make a follow-up video, Patrick.
All right, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Take care. See you in the next one.